The air inside the council chambers smelled of ozone and betrayal. Exarch Voorhees stood with his plasma pistol raised, the barrel glowing with the lethal heat of a discharged round. But the shot hadn't found its intended target. It hadn't pierced High Luminarch Ilara's heart. Instead, it had slammed into the unarmored chest of Warden Kale. There was no scream, only the wet hiss of cauterized flesh and the heavy thud of a body hitting the polished floor. Ilara dropped to her knees, her hands hovering over the smoking wound, her pristine robe soaking up the red reality of violence. Kale's eyes, usually hidden behind a visor, were wide and locking onto hers with an intensity that burned hotter than the weapon. He wasn't looking at his wound. He was checking to see if she was safe. In that fraction of a second, the distance between their worlds collapsed. Peace is fragile, but scars are permanent, and he had just bought her survival with his own blood. 6 hours earlier, the only thing Kyle had been fighting was the suffocating judgment of the Othelgardian court. He had arrived at the crystalline spire clad in battered battle plate, a walking tank amidst a civilization that prided itself on mental purity and light-woven fabrics. The sound of his magnetic boots on the glass walkways was an affront to their delicate sensibilities. He felt the weight of their stares, hundreds of telepaths dissecting his crude reliance on physical shielding. High Luminarch Ilara sat upon the dais of light, flanked by the sneering Exarch Voorhees. She looked down at Kale, her expression unreadable but cool. Armor protects the body, but isolates the soul. She had projected into his mind, her telepathic voice clear as a bell. Kale didn't flinch. He wore silence like a second skin. He simply inclined his head, his helmet reflecting the prism lights of the room. He wasn't there to debate philosophy. He was there because the Terra Nova Treaty demanded a warden presence. You bring steel to a sanctuary of the mind, Voorhees scoffed, stepping forward. It is a testament to your primitive fear. Kale remained statuesque, his vitals holding steady despite the rising irritation. Quiet duty can speak louder than boastful pride, and he had no intention of engaging in a verbal spar he couldn't win. He was watching the perimeter, scanning the flux lines, doing the job they were too arrogant to realize needed doing. Then the alarm screamed, shattering the calm. A psionic storm, rare and catastrophic, surged through the spire's foundations. The resonance frequency of the building spiked, threatening to shatter the crystalline supports. The court dissolved into panic. Telepaths clutched their heads, overwhelmed by the psychic backlash. Voorhees shouted contradictory orders, his composure fracturing along with the architecture. The reactor core. Kale moved before the order was given. He sprinted toward the engineering sector, the kinetic servos in his legs whining as he pushed them past safety limits. He found the reactor chamber bathed in blinding, erratic energy. The stabilization field had collapsed. Without hesitation, Kale punched the manual override. It was jammed. He had to go inside. He sealed his suit and stepped into the containment field. The energy density was crushing. It tore at his armor, stripping away the ceramic plating layers. He reached the manual heavy lock, gripping the wheel with gauntleted hands. He pulled. The metal groaned. A jagged arc of psionic lightning lashed out, striking his helmet. The faceplate shattered. Pain, white-hot and blinding, seared across his face. He didn't let go. He roared a raw human sound of defiance and wrenched the wheel. The stabilizer engaged. The storm broke, the energy dissipating into a harmless hum. Kale stumbled out of the chamber, falling to one knee. He ripped the ruin of his helmet from his head. Ilara and her guard arrived just as he looked up. The left side of his face was burned, an angry red line tracing from his temple to his jaw. He looked at her, breathing hard, his eyes exposed and vulnerable for the first time. It was a warrior's face revealed by lightning. In that moment, stripped of his steel shell, Ilara saw not a brute but a man who had walked into fire for people who despised him. The silence that followed the plasma discharge was not heavy. It was sharp, brittle, and vibrating with adrenaline. Kale lay on the crystalline floor, his chest heaving against the searing pain of the impact. The smell of cauterized skin mixed with the metallic tang of the cooling weapon in Voorhees' hand. Exarch Voorhees stared at the smoking barrel, his face twisting from shock into a desperate, sneering rage. "He sabotaged the core," Boris screamed, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at the fallen warden. "I saw him tampering with the heavy lock. He is a traitor to the Spire." Alara did not look at Boris. Her hands were pressed against Cale's chest, her pale fingers stained with the dark red reality of his sacrifice. She could feel the erratic thrum of his heart beneath her palms, a frantic, stubborn rhythm, fighting to keep him alive. The heat radiating from his skin was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the cool, detached mental projection she was used to. "Trust is built through actions, not just diplomacy." The words echoed in her mind, drowning out Vori's lies. She had watched Cale walk into the reactor fire. She had seen him burn for them. "You speak of sabotage," Alara said, her voice low but carrying a resonance that made the glass walls hum. She slowly stood up, placing herself between Cale and the Exarch. "But this man carries the burns of our salvation on his face, while you hold the weapon of an assassin." Boris raised the pistol again, his eyes wild with the panic of a collapsing coup. "Step aside, Luminarch. He is a contamination." Alara didn't flinch. She didn't raise a shield. She didn't summon the guards. She simply extended her mind, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. She projected the image of Cale inside the reactor, the raw, agonizing courage of a human, ripping a scorching wheel with his bare hands directly into the minds of every guard and courtier in the room. The truth hit the room like a physical shockwave. Prejudice often stems from a lack of understanding, but in that moment, everyone understood. The guards moved instantly, their staves leveling at Boris. The weapon clattered from his hand as he was seized, his cries for order swallowed by the undeniable evidence of Cale's loyalty. Alara dropped back to her knees. Cale was struggling to sit up, his teeth gritted against the pain. He looked at her, his eyes clear despite the trauma. "Target neutralized," he rasped. "Target neutralized," Alara whispered, a tremor running through her hands as she hovered them over his injury. "You didn't have your armor." "Too slow," Cale grunted, accepting the medical drone hovering nearby. "Armor makes you slow." Days later, the hangar bay was bathed in the soft amber light of the setting sun. The air was filled with the whine of engines preparing for liftoff. Cale stood by the ramp of his transport, dressed in simple fatigues. The heavy battle plate was crated away in the hold. The plasma burn on his chest was bandaged, but the lightning scar on his face remained a jagged silver line running down his cheek. He made no attempt to hide it. Alara stood before him. She felt small without the dais of light, but grounded in a way she never had before. "You could stay," she said, the offer hanging in the space between them. "The Spire owes you a debt." Cale shook his head slowly. "The Spire is safe. My orders are for Terra Nova." He paused, looking at the crystalline structures towering in the distance. "Besides, you don't need a warden anymore." Alara looked at the scar on his face, then at his eyes. She realized he was right, but not for the reason he thought. She had spent her life believing that perfection was the ultimate defense, that shielding the mind and body was the only way to lead. But Cale had shown her that vulnerability is a form of courage, not weakness. He had bled to prove that peace wasn't kept by walls, but by the people willing to stand in front of them. "Safe travels, Warden," she said, extending a hand. He took it. His grip was warm, rough, and undeniably human. The electric shock of the touch lingered long after he released her. "Goodbye, Alara," he said. As his ship ascended, piercing the clouds and disappearing into the void, Alara remained on the platform. She watched until the contrail faded. She felt exposed in the wind, unprotected and unshielded, and for the first time in her life she was not afraid. True strength required no shield.